Hi everyone, and welcome to the Trans and Non-Binary Experiences panel of 2020. I'm your LGBT officer, Ben Campbell, and I have our lovely panelists with me in the Zoom call. So a little bit about the campaign. So this is the beginning of Trans Awareness Week. This is the first event for it. This is an opportunity, this event specifically, and the campaign is kind of based around amplifying and listening to trans and non-binary voices, whether it be students on campus or the community nationally and in a bigger scale. So I'm not going to take up too much more of the time. I obviously won't be involved in the discussion. It will be led by the fabulous Edwin. So if we'd like to go around and introduce ourselves on a pronoun, so I'm going to see him. If Ray, you'd like to start?
Yeah, I am Ray. So I just got a load of feedback in. I'm Ray, doing computer science and also working part-time for the Newcastle University.
And your pronouns?
Oh, she and her.
Laurie?
I'm Laurie. I'm an undergraduate first year student at Newcastle, and use they, them.
Caden?
Hi, I'm Caden. I go by they and he, and I'm a second year undergraduate. And I'm also the trans rep and the non-binary rep for the LGBT SOC.
Edwin?
Yeah, hi, I'm Edwin. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a fourth year part-time undergrad student.
And Rabs, finally.
Hi, I'm Rabs. I'm the undergraduate student. I go by they, them, and I'm the president of the LGBT Society.
So that's all the time I'll take up. Just quickly before, we do have a live question feed. If you go onto Slido, which I believe is SLIDO, and use the code 31003, you can send in a live question, which we may have time to answer at the end. So that's all I'll say. Edwin, feel free to take the floor.
Cool, yes, so hi everyone. I am going to be kind of asking the questions and like letting you answer it. I guess that's the description of my role, I guess. I'll also make a couple of comments, obviously myself, as I am also trans, but it's, mostly, yeah. So our first question, we're kind of going to start with the favorite topic of 2020. In what ways has the COVID-19 pandemic and also lockdown affected you in terms of your trans non-binary gender experience? Anyone want to start?
Okay, that's sorry, I was about to say something now. I can't really think. Basically, in a way, it's affected me because I'm not going out as much. Whether that's affecting the gender non-binary experience, because I've been transitioning for a number of years and I'm more accepting of it, and people are just more accepting of it now. So in that respect, yeah, I'm not meeting as many people in clubs and places, socializing as much in gender that I am.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because I was still at school when this started, and I was still living at home with my parents and stuff, and we also had my granddad living with us over the first lockdown, because he couldn't really live by himself. But that's just hard, like when you're living with, it's not that they're not accepting or not understanding, it's just it's not the same as just being with other people your own age and spending time with other LGBT people. You just don't get that interaction, and that kind of hard, that was hard for a bit.
Yeah, I agree. I had a similar thing where when lockdown started, I went home. So I was living with my parents again, which was weird, definitely, and my sister. And it was weird because I'd had some problem with getting my mum to say the right name. But I actually think in lockdown, that was sort of when she started to make the most progress with sort of saying the right name. So in that way, maybe it was a good thing. But I definitely missed that feeling of being around people who were my age, who related to what I was saying. Just like the experience of being with trans people is just like really helpful, and I definitely missed it.
Yeah. And in terms of the being at home, because I know a lot of people certainly went home for the first lockdown, and there are people who are still at home today. And you know, if you're not out, then obviously that's a difficult way to have to live, because you can't even leave the house and go hang out with people that you're out to. And if you even are out, it's not the same as being around people who automatically get it. Whereas, you know, so I've always lived with at least one other trans person when I've been up in Newcastle. So the name, the pronouns, the gender identity, you know, if I change something and go, actually, this is something I'm more comfortable with, then that comes almost immediately. Whereas at home, it's, you know, even I am out to my parents, but it definitely takes more work, and it's definitely more exhausting. So yeah, I would also. Does anyone have any opinion on like masks? Like in terms of like, do masks make people feel more or less comfortable? Because I've seen a couple of different opinions on this about, you know, in terms of gender presentation, what people feel like in wearing a mask leaving the house.
I feel like this is the issues I had were more to do with my whole issues with just fashion in general, which is I feel like there's two warring sides of me. One that wants to look really amazing, and the one that wants to dress as masculine and as possible. And let's be honest, masculine clothes are not always the prettiest. So I have two masks, and one's just plain black and one's sort of got like a paisley pattern on it, and it's blue and sort of shiny. So then I do find myself, I want to wear the blue one, but then I'll be like, what if people think I'm a girl because I'm wearing the blue mask? And I don't even know if that's true, but there are definitely insecurities that I have where I think other people are perceiving me in a certain way because of which mask I'm wearing, which is really weird. But that's definitely something I noticed. I don't know if it's anything inherent about the masks, though. It's just my specific choice of mask, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
I've noticed like sometimes with the shoulders thing, even when wearing coats and things, if I'm wearing a chunkier mask, people are more jumping to masculine for like the KN95s, which I wear a lot of. But if I'm wearing like a flesh colored, well, white flesh colored, cream flesh colored, kind of normal cloth mask, that's almost more people seeing the more feminine side. I don't know, it's because the KN95 just makes you look, because it sticks out a lot, it's got the big jaw and everything on it.
To be honest, I haven't actually found like any difference like wearing a mask or not, like whether or not it's just wearing one in general or like what it looks like or anything. Like, masks haven't really made much of a difference. I think because like I get a lot of people who get very surprised at my voice. So like my voice is the one thing that will surprise people. So like if you're wearing a mask and then suddenly you say something, it's like, hang on a minute. But yeah, otherwise no difference.
Raps, do you have any comments on anything yet?
In terms of masks, I like them. I feel like they make me look more masked. I don't know why. It just fits with a bandana, I think. Lockdown's been interesting. I think in another way, for people who are kind of like more confused or not less certain about their gender identity, I think lockdown was a great opportunity for that sort of self-reflection and kind of, because you were really stuck doing nothing all day for a very long time. So I think a lot of people might have self-reflected and I kind of figured out how they identify and what they are and who they are a bit more. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well, actually, because another aspect of that lockdown experience where you're being perceived by a lot less people in the world, there's less external influence on your gender. Even if you're living in a house with people who are seeing you as one gender, which is potentially not what your gender is, you're not going out to university and getting, fellow students or lecturers who are seeing you as a particular gender. You're not going to, high street shops where people are saying, oh, here you go, miss, or here you go, sir, as a particular gender. So I think having less external, I don't know, would you agree that having less external interpretations of your gender when you're still questioning can sometimes also allow for that wiggle room of figuring yourself out?
Well, going back to the first question, and it overlaps this, and that's about figuring it out. But one thing that occurred to me after saying that was in the period in between the lockdowns when things were open, especially when everything went down to 10 o'clock, I was probably only socializing with 8 to 12 people. About 6 to 12 people. And that was partly because of the table bookings. Whereas in the past, you would go out and you'd maybe arrange to meet up with one person, and then you'd have 5 or 6 other people just turn up spontaneously because everything had to be arranged. It was the same kind of group that was arranging, and then sometimes we got to the point where there was one over, so we couldn't, had to figure it out just for the table booking space. And then you didn't really see anybody else from other groups.
Yeah, absolutely. So does anyone else have any other comments on this discussion so far, or shall I move on to the next question?
Move on.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so again, kind of related to the past question. Obviously, at the moment, for most students, this obviously does not apply for all students. I'm conscious of that. But for those of us who now have university primarily online, how has virtual classes impacted your trans experience at university?
I guess being able to put your pronouns up on Zoom and stuff is kind of useful because you couldn't do that in a normal lecture situation. But I don't really think it's affected it in any other way because for me, for my course, we all have to have our cameras and our microphones on anyway. So it's not like people can't see you and can't make assumptions in that way. So I don't really know. I don't know what it's like because obviously I also just have never experienced university before. So, but I don't know what it's like for people who used to have actual real lectures.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed a difference. One of the main things for me is I gave up on having my camera on because I found I just couldn't concentrate with it on. But then I think I get misgendered more with off because all that's left is my voice. And especially when I'm talking to people that I don't know that very, very well, it tends to be more high pitched. So then I did have an occasion where I was misgendered. And then from that, I put my pronouns in what my Zoom name was, but I was the only one. So then I felt a little bit self-conscious because nobody else had it. And it was sort of immediately after somebody had called me the wrong pronouns. So it was a weird situation. And I don't quite know how to feel about it yet. Because this is all very weird. But I think it was sort of annoying, having that. Because I do think how you dress and how you sort of, I don't know, take up space, if that makes any sense, is very important for how people sort of view you and your gender. And I think that was sort of a little bit taken away because all they can see is either the screen or they can only hear my voice. And so I have almost less control, I think, over how I'm seen, even though I can put my pronouns down there. But if I'm the only one, then it does feel like there's a spotlight on me, which is a bit uncomfortable. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from that, or maybe Ray, or I mean, Rabs, I understand clinics. I don't know the full ins and outs of your university experience, but I mean, you spend time in person with people anyway, so I don't know.
In my case, the thing is, most of my course was online in the first place, so yeah, it's not really affected it too much. In fact, if anything, I'm actually having more interaction now with the people that are on camp, well, the people that would have been on campus, but yeah. But it's the same kind of thing. It's, as other people have said, I'm just always conscious that if I speak, people might misgender me. But on the other hand, people have also said that the way I speak, the way I've always spoken anyhow, is somewhat ambiguous. So.
I'm not actually, going off what you said, Edwin, about clinics, I'm not actually out as non-binary to anyone really at my uni or my course, just because it is dentistry. So obviously I see a patient or a new patient every day or every other, like very constantly. And like you don't get to know the clinicians very well either. So it's just that sort of thing where it's like, it's more hassle than actually doing it. Which does suck, but yeah, so like lockdown, a lot of stuff being online hasn't really impacted me at all because it's not really online for me. But yeah, it wouldn't really have, I think, because I'm just not really out.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I am also not out in the kind of like academic context, not out of I am actively trying to hide the fact that I'm trans, more in the sense of I don't want to have to go to that effort of explaining, actually, I use a different name from that, I use different pronouns from that, primarily just because I don't necessarily trust people to put the effort in to remember when I say that. But it has caused a couple of problems for me in terms of using Zoom calls because obviously I use my laptop for Zoom. It means that I'm always kind of logged into the same university account. So as a part-time student, I only have one seminar a week. I usually go to a lot more LGBTQ society events than seminars, which means my name is almost always down as Edwin in Zoom. And it's sometimes hard to remember to change it back to my birth name when it comes to going on Zoom calls. So I think last seminar I had, I think everyone in the room spoke about their project apart from me. I wasn't asked, and it wasn't until the end of the seminar that I realized I had the wrong name. They probably had no idea who I was. Because my camera also wasn't working that day as well. So I think for me, Zoom has definitely caused more problems. We seem to be in agreement that there are some kind of like definitely issues with having to use Zoom, and that it's kind of a bit difficult gender-wise. But yeah, so bouncing off that and kind of stepping a bit away from Zoom generally, how has being at university, this can be like classes, societies, living away from home for people who do, like, how has university impacted your relationship with your gender identity?
Well, for me, I mean, I arrived here with the intention of just like fresh start, new slate, clean sheet, all of that. And I did it and it was fun and like it's worked and it's been really nice. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that's made me, it hasn't necessarily changed anything. It's just made me more like happy about it, I guess. Like euphoric as opposed to dysphoric. So, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it like the relationships changed at all. Just sort of like the feelings that come with that.
Yeah, I had the same thing where when I came to uni, I sort of like immediately changed my name. Like everywhere. I mean, there was a little bit of delay because I'm a bit lazy, so it took a while. But like, I was immediately going by Caden with my student card, and like soon after that, I got my deed poll done. So I was also intending to sort of like have a fresh start, whereas like I didn't have my dead name following me everywhere, and because I was sort of like half in the closet, half out of it during sixth form. So like, I would tell you what my actual name is if like you asked and stuff like that, and I told one teacher, but like everyone else, it was like, unless you're in the close friend group, you probably didn't know. Whereas here, like literally everyone knows. Like if you've met me at uni, like I don't think there's a single person that would like not know I'm non-binary. So it's different. Like it's quite freeing to like be able to go by the right name. Definitely. I definitely agree that there's like a euphoric feeling that goes to it. And just like having like trans people in the LGBT SOC is like great, because then you can talk about trans issues together, and it's like way of having a group which relates to you, which is really useful. Yeah. So that's how I feel it's been for me. Yeah.
I'd say with mine, it's the ID change and everything. That's good, and all the records are changing. There's a lot of old records about me because I've been in university environments with masters and things for a long time. And for another 2 universities, I'm planning to get my degree certificate name changed, which I've been told you can do retrospectively, but I'll be doing that probably after the deed poll change comes through. That's more for job applications, because I have to use. I don't want them to see a slight difference in the name when I'm saying, "Oh, I've got these degrees," and
Yeah, I didn't actually. I discovered that I was non-binary, or realized that I was non-binary, when I was at uni. So being at uni defined my experience in coming out or as non-binary or something. But yeah, it was just being around LGBT people and actually like because I never really dealt with gender. It was always the sexualities part that I was focused on. So when I came to uni, and then everyone was actually like talking about gender so freely and like without like all the complexities of it, I just kind of did the self-reflection, and I was like, yeah, you're right, I am non-binary. So yeah, kind of defined it.
Yeah,
Also, side note, Caden, you're the teacher that you only told one teacher. How many, like, was that an English teacher?
Yeah, it was an English teacher.
Yes.
Fair to me, she was my form teacher, but it was like in my final year, she was my form teacher, my English lit teacher, and my English language teacher. So I saw her like all of the time. So I like in the end, we sort of knew each other quite well. So yeah, it was an English teacher.
It's just a universal experience. Just, English teachers just vibing with you.
Yeah, English teachers are amazing.
They really are. But yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly in terms of there's definitely a difference, I think, in experience as to whether you know you're trans when you go to university and realizing that you're trans and or non-binary at university. I've realized I was trans kind of like around this time 2 years ago, and I think in part it's the kind of like living away from home. I think it's in part definitely, as Rab said, being in that community where you go to the LGBT society and there's lots of other people around you who are kind of like having those conversations about gender, and also not necessarily making those assumptions about you, because I mean in terms of like the year groups, I can already see it's like rapidly changing. Like my sister is she was in 2 year groups, like not the year group below me, but the year group below that, and she had actually quite a few friends who comfortably came out as trans in high school, whereas for me, I only had one, and it was kind of like people didn't really like talk about it a whole lot, and so I was in that environment where being cis was just like the normal thing. And then you come to university and you're able to somewhat choose who you interact with, and suddenly being cis is not necessarily the norm anymore, and you're able to just have that like conversation with yourself. But yeah, like I love the stories as well of like being able to like create that clean slate, because that sounds really great. That sounds like a wonderful experience.
To be honest, I do recognise that I am a little bit lucky in that I came out 3 years ago, and like that's quite a long time, but my communication skills were poor, so I've had to do it several times. But like that still means that like my whole school knew, like all my friends knew, like most of my family know, and it's like even though they still know, it's not the same as just like, because they've still got the like me from before, like they still know about all of this, and they've still got all of that in their heads. So like everybody here doesn't know me from before this, so that's what's nice about like starting afresh.
Absolutely, yeah, that's so nice. Are we happy to move on to the next question? Cool. Yes, so in terms of safe spaces on campus, whether that's kind of online with events like this or thinking about physical spaces, Laurie, I understand you're kind of at a disadvantage here in not having really experienced the physical spaces at the university, but does Newcastle University go far enough, do we feel, in creating a safe space on campus for trans and non-binary people? If not the case, do we have any kind of thoughts as to what we'd like to see to make us feel safer on campus?
All the Zoom Among Us games I've played so far have been fun, but I think that's about it.
The society helps, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm like struggling to remember what like it's like actually being on campus. Like I'm trying to think like, did I encounter many like gender neutral toilets? Like where were they? But I can't remember. Like I have a really poor memory, so it's escaping me a bit. But I think I don't remember anything where I was like, wow, this is amazing. The university is doing something great here. Like I think the closest I got was finding out that there was whole events that they were doing for Trans Awareness Week, and I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. But like I don't think that I found the physical space anywhere to be specifically tailored to me, if that makes any sense.
I think with the university, it's, well, there's quite a few gender neutral toilets around, especially in the student union, up where the computers are at the top, and amongst others. But they do tend to move around a bit. But even so, it's most of the toilets gender accessible, because I've often wondered about the idea of a gender neutral toilet being, if it's a cubicle, then shouldn't be a problem anyhow, if that makes any kind of, and if it's a row of cubicles, then why is that a problem? So yeah, there's also that issue. I think in terms of the university, although there has been, actually they did come down. So when over some racial incidents recently, so they did come down as a student over that. So yeah, I'm guessing they would do the same over trans issues, and they'd come down on your side if somebody was to be directly transphobic on campus, especially another student, yeah, over social media. I mean, some of the sports teams have been come down on for other issues. So, not because, some societies, not just necessarily sports societies, but some societies, in the instances I'm thinking of, there have been sports societies.
To be honest though, I mean, I play hockey, and when I joined, I joined the hockey society, and they were like, which team do you want to play for? Or I said, because I played mixed hockey in the past, and I said, I don't, I'm happy to play for either. And that I did get that opportunity to play for both. Obviously, hockey died a swift death recently because they can't do it anymore, but the couple of times I played was fun. So, and it was nice to have that opportunity, although it is like, I guess mixed sport is still kind of a hot topic of debate in a lot of places, so I don't really know if that's that's like a uni issue or a national issue. Probably a bit of both.
Now I'm thinking about it, I do remember one gender neutral toilet that I specifically encountered because I do philosophy, so it's in the philosophy area, and there was one, but I think it was also the accessible one, which is kind of annoying, especially because I know a lot of disabled people and I know how frustrating it is for them when somebody who is able-bodied is in the disabled toilet and they really needs the toilet, and I don't want to take up that space, even though I know it is sort of designated for non-binary people and sort of gender non-conforming people. I don't want to take up that space, so I found that kind of annoying that it was also the disabled toilet. So that's a whole other issue that came up with that I found. Yeah.
In regards to that problem, I think Ben, the LGBT officer, did just pass a motion, or is trying to pass a motion through council about making gender neutral toilets more accessible and stuff. So come to the next student council if you want to support that. Get a casual voting space and vote for Ben's thing.
Yeah. Do we have any concept of like spaces that feel safe for trans and non-binary people that aren't toilets? Is this like a weird like? But I haven't not. I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't thought about public toilets in a very long time, and like the fear that went straight through my heart when I suddenly thought, oh my god, we had to worry about like public toilets all the time. But yeah, because I think there's lots of kind of neutral study spaces in a lot of places. Do we feel like they feel comfortable enough for trans and non-binary people? Like, so like if you feel like you are like visibly trans, do you feel safe in that space? Or I don't know what I'm asking here, but like non-toilet spaces, do we have any thoughts on those?
I think with the study spaces, because it would only be another student that would do something, you do feel relatively free. I use the ones on top for the student union more than or the ones down on the ground floor near the co-op. But those are only for quick things. And so there's that issue in the library ones. Again, if because it's staffed, I'm sure if you've got a problem, you can get a member of staff to flag it up. Loofah's pretty much a safe space, I think, because there's a few bars in Newcastle I've been a bit nervous about going into, especially on my own, but Loofah's again, but that's because I guess I know that I can, if anything was to happen, I could probably walk down the corridor and, well, they might not be in on that day, but find a sabbatical or find us.
Yeah, I think because I spent a lot of time studying in the philosophy common room, and I sort of got to know a lot of other philosophy students who were in there a lot. So I think I got quite comfortable because they all knew that I was trans and they knew me. So I didn't really have any problems with that. But I don't know if that's much to do with what the university has done and more to do with the niceness of the other students. Who I encountered.
Yeah. Do we want to broaden the question and think about is there generally adequate support for trans non-binary students at the university?
To be honest, I haven't really explored it much yet, so I'm not sure I really know.
I think there's limited like support in general, to be fair. I think what I've noticed is that a lot of the support that the trans people in my life get are from other trans students who've like set up like stuff through a society or whatever, and like support each other through there or like group chats or like networks. It's less through the uni and more through other trans students, which is a worrying notion, but
Yeah, I can't think of anything where the uni itself has done something. They were very good about me changing my name, and they were very helpful with that. But that's sort of the main thing, really. I can't think of anything where it was like I had an issue and I knew that I could bring it up with someone and that there wouldn't be a problem, if that makes any sense. Partly because I didn't really have that many issues.
I think one way to kind of gauge what sort of resources there are and stuff is like going on the NUSU website. And I know, like, under, not to sound like an SU wanker, but there are like some tabs that has like for like marginalized gender and the resources and support to help with any issues with that. And obviously the Trans Awareness Week website, I think, stays up all year for like resources and stuff. So there are places to check. That's more again the students' union rather than the uni itself. The uni itself, I don't think I could think of one thing, and I've been here 4 years, so.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that split between like the university and the students' union. I think, I mean, I'm not super involved in SU politics, so I don't always think about it. But as soon as I'm thinking about what resources do we have, it's always very, very clear that like there's, you know, the difference between the SU and the university itself is, you know, it feels quite stark. I mean, certainly I know that, I mean, you know, this is my 4th year here at the university, and in terms of like observing, you know, friends try to get things through at the students' union, progress seems to be quite slow just because of like the nature of like how it works, trying to like pass motions and then trying to like, you know, badger people to actually like start doing things in relation to those motions. So it seems like a lot of hard work from where I sit. As far as the university is concerned, you know, I remember in my first year, maybe it was my second year, Trans Awareness Week, we brought up the idea that like, well, we feel like lecturers should get kind of like more training on like how to respond to trans and non-binary people, because sometimes it's less than ideal. I mean, I remember I once came out to not lecturers per se, but I mean in combined honours we just kind of talked to a lot of the admin staff and stuff anyway. So I came out to a couple of the admin staff and they basically immediately forgot it. But then there's been some lecturers, so it's on a lecturer by lecturer basis. Another lecturer, I've emailed and been like, actually, these are the pronouns that you use. So, you know, if I'm engaging in conversation in a lecture, these are the pronouns I want you to use for me. And she was very good about that. So I think definitely we can see inconsistencies in like the mass of culture that there is in a university, because we've got, you know, the societies, we've got the lecturers, we've got the university, we've got the students' union. So I guess, would we say that that kind of sounds about right? Yeah. Oh, I accidentally kind of went into the next question a little bit. So we've discussed a little bit about being, whether we're like out in the academic sense and whether we're out to lecturers and stuff. How are we all feeling with like the level of comfort of being out to lecturers? Do we think it's something that is dealt with in an appropriate way? Do we feel comfortable with the concept of coming out to lecturers? Do we think there's anything that lecturers can do to improve the way that, or anything the university can do to improve the way that we feel about coming out to lecturers who we see quite frequently?
Well, in theory, most of my lecturers already know, because like my name on the university database is still like the old one, but I use this name in all my Zooms and on Teams and everything I've handed in so far, and like my Canvas displays it as this. So like because they can see both, they're not gonna be like, oh, what a coincidence. Or maybe they are, I don't know. But and also I think kind of the fact that I put my pronouns up is a bit of a giveaway as well, because like not many people do. Like some people do, but I think that's more out of solidarity, because I don't think anybody else on my course is trans. But I don't really feel awkward, and I don't really think it's like, I'm not scared like to do it, or if anybody asked me a question I wouldn't feel odd. But then I do wonder if that's just a side effect of the fact that I've been out for a while and I'm more comfortable in it. And I think if you're somebody who, and also if you came out while you're at uni, then it might, like, I can understand why it would feel more weird for you to like do that with a lecturer.
Yeah, I think I have a similar thing, because I was also out when I came to uni, and I think I'm sort of quite visibly trans. So they sort of just, most of them already knew, and most of them were quite good about it. So I, like any lecturer where I specifically brought it up, it was great. But I also think that's part of like to do with who I approached, was the sort of people that I already knew would be okay with it, if that makes any sense. So I sort of agree with what you were saying, Edwin, earlier about it being a very case-by-case basis with the lecturers, because some of them are like absolute angels and are amazing and were immediately on the ball, and other ones I did not approach because I sort of knew that there'd be more issues, if that makes any sense.
I see very few of my lecturers face to face, but they all seem fine with it. It's partly because, I say, a lot of the changes I'm doing are long term, as in they will be long term, and there are hopefully changes, physical changes happening, anything else, and some of them are irreversible. And it's, yeah, I've had a few, initially I had a few failed starts at transitioning, partly due to not realizing the pushback at the time, and then feeling very upset and very put upon, not within the university environment, but within other environments such as Twitter. Then I realized not just to ignore that and just be with my friends kind of thing, and that helped a lot. But for me, it's actually, especially as I do have past degrees and doing current degree and a future degree in the pipeline, because everything interlacks. To get where I need to be, I actually need more degrees, which is kind of to cross fields a bit. So obviously I'd want to get everything to tally up as fast as I can in terms of, yeah.
Yeah, we were talking a bit at the start when we were discussing Zoom. Do we think it would be useful if seminar leaders and lecturers were encouraged, or were asked to encourage students to put their pronouns on? Because I mean, I know, Caden, you said, you put your pronouns up on your Zoom nickname, your Zoom screen name, in response to someone using the wrong pronouns to you, and then suddenly you felt like you really stuck out because you were the only person there with your pronouns on. Like, do we feel that that's, or anything else like that would make lecturers seem more accessible? Because I know in my second year I had a seminar leader who, and this was right at the start of the year, I didn't realize I was trans yet anyway. And there was this moment where he kind of he said ladies and gentlemen, and then you could kind of see in his head, oh, I've remembered non-binary people exist, and then kind of added on a slightly tonally different and non-binary pals. And that was a really key defining moment for me, where I was like, this is a good LGBT friendly seminar leader who, if I needed to speak to him about anything like that, I'd 100% feel comfortable doing that. So do we feel like there's anything like that should be somewhat set in guidelines for how lectures and seminars should be ran?
I mean, it's always interesting when you sort of suggest what people can do when they're in a position of power and trying to encourage students to do it. Partly because I'm always aware of pushback. If I thought about, maybe I'm still in a sort of secondary school mindset, but part of me worries that if you said put your pronouns in your thingy, then everyone would be like, oh, what's that for, or whatever. But it might be a good idea actually, because hopefully people are more mature than they were in secondary school. So hopefully, yeah, that would work. Maybe it's just me worrying about sort of things like that because of secondary school, you know, because secondary school kids, like if you suggest they do anything, they instantly want to do the opposite of it. So hopefully it's not still like that at university, you know. So yeah, but I definitely
wind of teen rebellion.
Yeah, it was weird as a moment, like, and also I have the issue of every time I log in, my middle name comes up and that's feminine, and so then I have to go like change my name to take it out, and then I have one where they've not got the option for renaming, and I don't have a particularly good relationship with that seminar leader for other reasons, so then I don't feel like I can ask, can you please give me the opportunity to rename, because I don't particularly want to talk to them. So yeah, I still feel like it should be that we are allowed the option to rename ourselves at the very minimum, because that's very frustrating when I can't take my middle name out when it's quite feminine, and I like my middle name. I just don't want everyone out there to know what it is, you know.
Yeah, going off of that, sorry, is there an echo?
Yes, but I can't see anyone else lighting up green, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, hopefully it works. But yeah, going off of that, like we're kind of expected to put our full names and like state or whatever in any like online seminar or lecture that we do, and that gets frustrating because I'm like Brabs. I don't even go by my second name. It's just Brabs. So getting my full name, which is also like never pronounced correctly either, because there's like a kind of dual sort of thing with that, because not like I was known as Brabs before I even came out as non-binary, so it's not even, or even knew I was non-binary. It's less a name that I changed for gender reasons, but also a name that I changed for like race-related reasons and stuff like that, just because nobody can actually pronounce my first name. And so often like lecturers or clinicians will like look at my name, because we all have to wear name tags and it has to be our full name as well in person. And it'll be like, they'll call me Rebecca, which is like just hurtful. I'm not a Becky. I mean, like I just don't look like someone who's called Rebecca. But like I've been called Ribena as well. So it's just that sort of racial thing where it's also like I don't feel comfortable being called my full name by anyone. And then not only that is that you can't even pronounce my full name. And I've got like such a cute, easy, short name for people to pronounce, but it just still matters.
And I've been wondering about, because in terms of yes, in terms of the way people speak to you on Zoom, because my only other thing was, well, if nobody knows what gender you are, then it's going to help marking not be gender biased, because studies are showing that some lecturers are still marking down based on assumptions of people's gender, which is why you've got attempt to do anonymous marking as whenever possible. But I guess they would already know who you are and who they're addressing, so it might should make things easier to, unless it becomes a rule that everyone's they. But then, yes.
Yeah, so we've got kind of a different couple of angles there from which we feel like it'd be important and valuable to a lot of students actually in the community, and just the general university community who would benefit from it being standard to allow for preferred names. And yeah, because I think I don't know if anyone disagrees with me on this, but I feel like preferred name is such a neutral way to phrase it where it's, you know, if someone's asking for your preferred name in a seminar context or for on a Zoom call or for any reason, that's, you're not even necessarily outing yourself as trans immediately by saying, actually, this is what my preferred name is, unless it's, well, I mean, my preferred name is quite distinctively a masculine name, and well, actually, my birth name is not particularly feminine either, but a preferred name, because it's useful for so many different people for so many different reasons, you're not necessarily, say, pointing and going, this is the reason I'm looking for a preferred name in this scenario. So even if you didn't necessarily immediately feel safe with that particular seminar leader or lecturer, it would still kind of give you that opportunity to say, okay, but this is just the name that you should be using in this context. That kind of seems like something that we all want somewhat. Yeah, okay. So I'll move on to the next question. This has applied for all the previous questions anyway, but especially this one, if you don't feel comfortable responding to this question at all, then don't worry about it. But has anyone experienced any instances of transphobia or hate speech or discrimination on campus? And if so, was it something that was reported, and was it resolved? Did you feel like it was dealt with in an appropriate way?
I have had experience. I can't think of any instances on campus.
Okay, cool. Short question.
No, I did have an experience I think I've talked about a couple of times. You've probably bored of this story, Edwin, because I've told it a few times, where I had a lecturer who brought up a trans woman, and sort of just, and in philosophy, she was critiquing this trans woman and her description of her gender from a philosophical viewpoint. However, this trans woman was not a philosopher. These were just random tweets by a journalist, and it was quite uncomfortable to be sat there and watch that, as I was probably the only trans person in there, and I was also probably quite visibly giving her death glares during it. And everybody else sort of seemed to brush it aside. And even now when people say like, oh, this module was my favorite module, I'm like, do you not remember that point where she just brought up this trans woman for no reason to sort of just be mean about her? And it's a bit upsetting. And in retrospect, I do sort of feel like I should have reported it, but I don't know if I had the energy to. Like, it sort of felt like, why should this be my job? Like, I was just unlucky enough to be sat in that lecture, and I don't want to have to deal with it any more than I sort of had to when I was there. And it was quite frustrating that not many other people picked up on it, and nobody else thought, wait, that's a bit weird. What's happening here? So that was very frustrating, and it was from a lecturer. So obviously that was one of the lecturers that I absolutely would not feel comfortable talking to about trans issues, even though she probably got that I was quite upset from the death glares that I was giving her across the lecture hall. So she probably got what was happening in that moment. But yeah, it was not fun. And I very much wish it hadn't happened, and I kind of wish I had reported it, but I don't know if there's any world where it wouldn't have been more upsetting to have to keep sort of going through that with people who might not necessarily understand and stuff like that.
That's absolutely a really important point, in that sense of why weren't there cis allies in that room who picked up and went, actually, this is really not appropriate, and like, why didn't they kind of turn around and report it? Because I mean, in the vast, I think basically in every marginalized community, there's this exhaustion and sense of burden where it's like, okay, yes, we talking about it a lot because we care about it, but can't our allies pick up some of that slack for us? Because it also hits, I think, harder when it's, because it's, your own community, and bringing that up is, as you say, kind of going to be like an exhausting and uncomfortable task. The act of reporting should, it is intimidating, I suppose, in some sense, because you just don't want to have to deal with that again.
Yeah, I found the idea of like reporting it quite intimidating, especially because there is this sort of attitude I've found in philosophy that you're allowed to question anything, which in some ways can be very good, but in some ways very bad. And I sort of feel like, because they are a philosopher, I feel like there was not much that I could have said where the response wouldn't have been something along the lines of, that's their free speech. So that was part of why I left it, which is also upsetting.
So could I ask, are you sure that that lecturer wasn't trying to get you to challenge? Not you personally, but somebody. I mean, I know with Twitter, I now don't post on Twitter about transition. I see something, but I've had such bad experience but I've seen the arguments just roll for years, and it's like the same arguments. I just don't want to get involved. But in a philosophy lecture, it's somewhat different. You're not going to get anonymous tweets for the next 6 months.
I am pretty sure that she didn't want to be challenged, because in another lecture I brought up a challenge to her point, and I asked her, like, why did you not acknowledge this, like, challenged my point midway through the lecture, and she basically said, I have this whole theatrics that I'm doing, and I don't want anyone to give me the answer before I say the answer at the end of the theatrical sort of display. So it was very much like she was doing a one-person show and she didn't want to be interrupted.
Is that kind of like intellectual superiority that you get from some people when you try and like say something that they don't agree with?
Yeah,
because this is kind of encroaching on like a few of the questions after this, like the upcoming questions, but like I do feel that sometimes cis people can sometimes say things without even realizing that it's like maybe a little bit contentious or even just like wrong, because if you're not constantly aware of things because you're not living like this, then it's not necessarily going to be on your radar 24/7. So I always feel a bit weird, like sometimes I'm like, I don't want to have to keep reminding people of things or talking to people about things, because it's like you have a sort of obligation is probably a bit strong of a word, but like along those lines of do you do that education yourself. Like it's not up to us to constantly be like, no. Like just, but then I think that's also just a reflection of society as a whole. Like this isn't even a university issue, this is just the entire world. Like this is still, in terms of recent history, a relatively new or fresh thing to like be acceptable. So there's not going to be that much education and awareness around the world, and I think we just, patience is sadly key.
Yeah. Are we comfortable moving on to the next question, or are there any other thoughts around this one? Okay, cool. So in terms of any form of education that we can quickly think off the top of our heads in this moment, because of course I think in terms of personally I find, an event like this is a good way for a cis person to kind of like, sit and watch and go, okay, here are things that I can take on board without harassing every trans and non-binary person I know to like tell me what to do and this, that, the other. And for us, I feel, because it's, we are talking to each other almost somewhat as, trans and non-binary people together, so we're not in a position where we're immediately gonna receive backlash for things that we say. I feel like somewhat less tiring to be in that position, as opposed to, say, making a comment on Twitter and then suddenly, and knowing that you're gonna have a load of people come back and say, no, you're wrong, and all that nonsense. So yeah, on this topic, what misconceptions do we feel like cis people have about trans and non-binary people that we'd like to kind of shoo away?
This is kind of, again, linked to like what we were just talking about in terms of like people asking questions all the time. Is the first thing that's always at the forefront of my mind is like kindness. Like if somebody asks me a question, no matter how like invasive it is, I don't want to just be like rude. But I do feel that some cis people sort of think that trans people just get very offended all the time about all sorts of things, when actually no. Like I'm more than happy to teach people things, like if they want to ask, you know. Like I'm you know, it's almost like you're not going to sink to that level of like, it's also if somebody's like deliberately trying to offend you as well, then you're like, just stop.
Yeah, there is a big difference between like when somebody is asking you a question out of pure curiosity and when somebody's asking you a question where like you sort of know that they are asking a question to get a rise out of you. And for me, it's completely acceptable to shut down any question where they're just trying to get a rise out of you straight away. But you've got to be sort of more gentle when they are just honestly like interested, because sometimes you won't be comfortable asking like answering a certain question. But I think people need to understand that if like the response you get of trans and non-binary people when you ask a question, it's not to do with sort of like asking a question is inherently like awful. It's sort of us trying to work out how comfortable am I with like answering this question at this moment. Like how likely is it that this person is just asking out of curiosity and stuff like that, because you do sort of notice certain patterns where certain questions only get asked if it's from a malicious place, and then you can sometimes get caught out when it's asked out of pure curiosity. So I do feel like when it comes to questions that you get, it's a bit of like what's it called, like landmine field.
Minefield, yeah.
Landfield, yeah. It's a bit of a landfield, like yeah, it's very difficult. Like we're doing our best and we understand that you might not necessarily know what's going on and like have a question like from pure curiosity, but sometimes we'll misinterpret why you're asking, or we'll misinterpret the question, or we won't feel comfortable. And it's difficult trying to strike a good balance between, it's the age-old problem of trying to pick your battles, basically, isn't it? Like it's really hard to tell when you should just answer sincerely and when you should be like, no, just go away right now, you know.
One thing that I've noticed is, although there's a lot of attacks, drawback against people transitioning from male to female, female to male, there seems to be a lot of people who are against the idea of non-binary. Some of them are actually in support of full transition, or not full, of transitioning from one to the other. But for them, they say that what is this middle? There's either yin or yang. It's one or the other. So some people can be more actually understanding if you're going all the way. So that they're saying, well, you just made up, non-binary people just made up this thing. There's also, from what I've come across, on the more other side of that, there's a lot of people in the past, I've been reading, who've come across the conception that most non-binary people were born female, and they're then arguing that, that's not going to protect from sexual assault, being non-binary. So again, there's all kinds of different blowbacks from people. Some people denying that you can transition at all, some people denying that there's the non-binary, and others, yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of I get what you're saying about the like there are some people who are totally all for and supportive of like binary trans people, but then it's like they draw the line at non-binary for whatever reason. Because I experienced that a little bit, like coming out, you know, it's like, oh, why aren't you just a boy? Or like, why aren't you just a girl? Like, pick one. But the other thing as well is like, you don't necessarily have to get somebody's full life story to like just, you know, use their pronouns or like just be respectful. Because I sometimes feel like, but this also, it's not because people actually ask me, but it's this internalized feeling of like, I feel like I owe people an explanation when like I'm trying to teach myself out of that, of like, you don't need to tell everybody.
Rabs, do you have any comments on misconceptions?
Yeah, I was just, I think the biggest one for me is not everyone, like, it's not, people often, like, cis people often act like being trans must have been like the worst thing to happen, and it's like this really tragic story and tragic thing, and sometimes it's just really simple and you just know. And yeah, there are obstacles, but there's obstacles in every aspect of life. And like, I'm not saying trans people have it easy, but I do think this sort of idea that it's like, it's still kind of seen as that tragic thing that like must be so hard and there must be a sob story behind it and stuff like that. It's like, no, sometimes it's just really easy and simple.
Yeah, so that kind of like concept of like the misconception that trans people must all be miserable, just because of their understanding of, I guess, because they see all this like transphobia happening, and I guess they think, oh, it must be the worst in the world, when actually a lot of us have a decent few coping mechanisms to spend a lot of time ignoring it and not having to deal with it. I find personally that there's this misconception about trans and non-binary people as if they're this, you know, this, hive mind that, you know, we're all kind of like basically the same and we all have the same opinions on things, and you know, this kind of this, you know, trans and non-binary monolith, which obviously we're not. We are a very, very, very diverse bunch of people, and a lot of us have some very severe disagreements with each other. And I remember talking to my mother about being non-binary, and I mentioned the fact that there are binary trans people who are kind of anti the idea of non-binary people. They think that we don't exist and all that sort of stuff. And she was so surprised. She was like, how could other trans people be like this? And it's like, well, because we're not all the same. Everyone has their own different kind of like, you know, external influences and the way that their kind of thoughts and feelings around certain things have developed. So yes, there can be transphobic trans people, and cis people really struggle with this concept. But you're trans, how can you be transphobic? Or if you're transmisogyny excluded, oh, but how could you be transphobic to that trans woman? Well, because that person doesn't experience transmisogyny, so they can fall into those same mindsets. Another one that I always think of is kind of linked, is the idea that we all have the same kind of like concept of what language we want to be used around us. Certainly we can also find this in like generational differences between different groups of trans people, where it's like, because language around the LGBT community moves quite fast at the moment, there are older trans people who are more comfortable with terms that young trans people feel are very outdated, and around different language that people like to use. So yeah, there's all these misconceptions that we experience.
I think it's because people don't realize, if they've not thought about their gender a lot, they don't realize how personal the experience of gender is. And so, of course, people's ideas of gender develop in very different ways based off how they personally feel, who they've met, who they're talking to. It's so personal that, like, the idea of like complete consensus is practically impossible. And I think that is also where some of the sort of more obvious misconceptions come from, is sort of this not realizing how personal gender is. And I think that is part of why some people would be against non-binary people, because they think of it as just sort of, well, you're either that or that. This is just how it is. And they've not sort of ever sat down and thought, well, how do I actually feel about gender? You know, because if how you feel about gender is more aligned with the norm, then it's much easier to work out how you feel about it more quickly, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Cool.
Do we have more thoughts on misconceptions, or are we good to go on to the next question? Okay, cool. So again, kind of something, answers that we're looking to communicate to cis people. How can cis people work to be respectful of trans and non-binary identities while people are transitioning, either physically or socially or both, whatever is specific to the person?
I think this sort of links back, for me, my answer anyway, is sort of use the language to describe them that they ask you to use, but also don't assume that that applies to every trans person you meet. Like, if in doubt, ask what language they would like to use. Ask about pronouns as the number one obvious thing. If in doubt, ask about their pronouns. Sometimes that can be uncomfortable and can be an awkward situation, but it's infinitely better than consistently getting it wrong with someone, is how I feel about it.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything to add to that.
Yeah, like that's a pretty perfect summary.
Yeah, just like asking, and that it's just a politeness thing, right? And I would add to the kind of like pronoun thing, where if you get someone's pronouns wrong and you know you've got that person's pronouns wrong because it just slipped out, don't worry, we all do it. Like, that's just how brains work sometimes. I misgender myself, I misgender other trans people because the pronouns sometimes just slip out in the wrong order because of the way coding works in your brain. Don't do the whole guilt trippy thing of if they call you out and say, oh no, it's these pronouns, oh my god, I'm so sorry, I'm a terrible person, I'm not doing enough, and you know, the kind of like trying to get us to comfort you about the fact that you got our pronouns wrong. Please don't, is what I would ask about that, because you know, getting someone's pronouns wrong is a very common thing. You know, you do it for cis people, you do it for trans people. It's just something that happens, and just, you know, just saying, oh sorry, yeah, of course, this pronoun, then that's kind of all you need to do. And it's like, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, and like the trans person is probably going to feel a little bit bad about it, but the correction is so much more important than the initial mistake.
Yeah. And I would add to that, like, when you like find a new pronoun or someone like changes pronoun, just like practice it, because like it's not going to be sort of, it's not going to make sense in the brain at first, but like just like think like, oh, like they went to the store, like they asked me to do this, then it just becomes easier like instantly, because like there's nothing inherently wrong with like having a little bit of trouble like reconciling in your brain what you used to know about someone in this new information, or like having a problem where you like briefly slip up with like the pronoun. Like that is normal, and it's sort of annoying, but it's normal, and literally everyone does it, and it doesn't mean you're an awful person. You can just like correct your mistake and move on. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone's keeping track of the list of questions, I'm going to skip the one under this because I think that's a good last question, and I am instead going to ask one of the hardest questions for me, because I'm just going to say it outright. I don't have any because I'm bad at consuming media. What are some of your favourite trans and non-binary role models?
Miles McKenna. Who, for anybody who doesn't know, he's an American YouTuber. He's also put some music out recently as well, but I've been watching his videos for years, and he does an awful lot for his like local community, not just online but in person as well. And like, I just think he's cool, man.
Yeah. I also don't consume a whole load of media, so I guess like some of my favorite trans role models are like the ones I've actually met in real life. Like meeting other trans people like out in the wild is like really cool. Like being in situations where you can see somebody else who's like happy and like is sure about their gender and stuff like that is just like really cool.
Yeah, I agree with that, because as soon as Edwin said the question, I was like, Quinn, who was last year's president, and they're just like, they came out, I think, in first year as non-binary and changed their name and stuff, and like seeing that being so visible and like normalized, just made it really easy for me to kind of be like, yeah, call me Rabs from now on, and like they them and stuff. So it is just visible people in your life, I think.
But I mean, like having people on like TV is also obviously really useful, and like I think it's difficult because there isn't that much media. But when like there is someone who is trans, it's always like, oh, that's really cool, you know. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna stop talking now.
Yeah, I can't really think of anybody that in the media that would spring to mind like as an ultimate role model, especially as a lot of parts of trans people haven't been. I don't have a problem with part of a trans person not being played by somebody who isn't trans if they're a good actor, and because obviously there's different points on your transition, especially if you're a hormone. It might be better to have either somebody that's gone through the entire spectrum, that then you can't find a good actor to do that, or to that point with the character. For me, it's more again people that I've met. Some of the people in the Northeast trans community gave me some advice initially. Also, like when I was a lot younger, the science fiction community, there was a big age range. I mean, a lot of my friends were 10, 15, 20 years older, and some of them were, when I was 16, they were 35 and had transitioned already, but they were kind of early pioneers in everything.
I think I would say, I mean, it's becoming a more kind of like a normalized thing. I've just remembered, I mean, it's not really the genre of music I tend to listen to, but when Sam Smith came out as non-binary and said, actually, I use they them pronouns, I remember being that kind of feeling quite impactful. I mean, I saw obviously on Twitter, there were people who responded badly towards it, but taking the step to say, okay, fine, I'm just going to communicate this to everyone. I am non-binary and use they them pronouns. I thought that was quite powerful. I'm also kind of, when it comes to like celebrities who are like quieter about gender but kind of give out potential signs that like trans people can go, okay, well, this person hasn't openly said I'm trans, but here are the signs that either they're kind of like on our side or like actually share some experiences. So in terms of Gerard Way, My Chemical Romance and The Umbrella Academy, uses he, they pronouns, and has talked a lot about kind of like feeling very close to the trans community in terms of experiences of gender, and just that looseness of it being, well, here are some things that this person has said about gender, and that feels kind of like nice and warm, but also you, regardless of like whether he is or would or would not define himself exactly as trans, I think I found that powerful in the sense of you don't have to come out to the whole world and be like, either I'm trans or I'm cis. Like, you can talk about gender and kind of like show yourself in that sense to the community, but you don't have to kind of, I don't know that person's personal life because, you know, it's a celebrity, but it's just like that sense of comfort in, it doesn't have to be someone 100% stepping out on stage and saying, I'm non-binary and I use they them pronouns.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry.
You go first.
I just think I do sort of forget how powerful things like that can be, because I did come out when I was 15. Like, I've been out a while, like, and so I do think I forget how powerful it can be for people who are questioning their gender to see people like that. So maybe like the reason I can't think of any like off the top of my head is because for me, there was maybe like a 2-week thinking process, and then I like came out to my friends. So it wasn't really a thing where I had like ages and ages where I was just like torn up about it. I was just like, this is me, and then I told like the most important people. So I think if I sort of had more time where it was just in my brain, then seeing people out in the real life, like the real world, like celebrities and things, would have been sort of very important to me, actually, now I think about it.
Raps, do you want to speak?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, about like having someone who hasn't like explicitly said they're non-binary, or like their kind of relationship with gender has kind of still reflected your own. I think Janelle Monáe is a great example for that, because she obviously so she's like obviously from like the beginning of her career been very androgynously dressed and presented very androgynously, like always kept the short hair and always wore suits, and you know, was quite androgynous. And then I think last year she came out, she just tweeted, quote tweeted an article and said with the hashtag I am non-binary, and then later on she came out in an interview and was like, I actually, you know, through some self-reflection stuff, I'm not actually non-binary, but I do relate to a lot of the experiences of just wanting to let gender go, but I do still identify as a woman and stuff. But like, because I followed her career for so long, like, and she came out as non-binary around the same time that like I discovered I came out as non-binary, if you get my meaning. That was like really good to have someone like that who kind of just had like a sort of simple relationship with gender, and that like they just wanted to kind of separate themselves from it, or highlight how you know, how fluid it can be. And obviously she was like mentored by Prince, so Prince and like David Bowie and stuff, not that they're like great idols, but you know, a lot of they were doing gender non-conforming stuff for years and years before any of us were even born, yet alone. You know, so like I think they were some of the pioneers for like gender non-conforming and gender fluidity. So people like them and Janelle Monáe, I think, you know, even if they don't necessarily identify as trans or under a trans umbrella, they still can relate to it and stuff.
Yeah, I think it is useful when like people are able to sort of identify partially with like the trans experience, because like even like if somebody doesn't like their name and stuff like that, then that's almost like a useful bridging point. Or if like somebody likes playing with gender and stuff like that, that's also a useful bridging point. So if people sort of discuss more how they feel about gender, then that is really useful, because then it becomes normalized that people have, again, personal feelings about gender. So then when trans people have personalized feelings about gender, then it's more understandable to people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's all really powerful. Are we comfortable moving on to the next question? Cool. So in terms of media, we kind of touched on the fact that we can't necessarily think of loads of examples off the top of our heads, but do you think that the media, both in terms of like non-fiction media like the news or entertainment, accurately depicts the trans community? Can you think of like any programs that do a really, really good job of showing the trans community, or do you feel like it's all lacking, and in what way?
Most of the trans rep that I've come across is in books. So
Yeah,
I've read so many books that have really good trans rep in them. But in terms of like TV shows, almost nothing.
yeah,
And I think a lot of that comes from the argument that is floating around of like, should cis people be allowed to play trans people? Should like only exclusively trans people be allowed to play trans characters? And like, I just think in a book you can do literally anything. Like you don't need a 2.5 million budget to like do anything in a book. So there's a lot more creative freedom there than what you can do with like an actor who's only capable of portraying like what they have, like in terms of physical features. So I think an element of why there isn't so much media rep is actually out of, you know, just being scared to do it in the first place.
yeah.
But in terms of the news, so like non-fiction, I do think the news can be quite dangerous in terms of what they like to pick up on. So, you know, you've got your quite serious news stations in this country, and then you've got your sensationalist tabloids and magazines and whatever that mainly are just looking to start tension. They're looking to create like animosity between people, so they'll pick up on controversial stuff. Like, for example, you see way more about people who detransition in the news than people who actually transition in real life. And it paints, especially for cis people who may not even know it, like a trans person, it paints a really bad like image of what our community is actually like. You very rarely see what is like the normal side of the trans community, because you only ever see the drama.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like, I feel like the news, like, there's so many narratives, especially about like, I don't know, like convincing kids that they're like a different gender than they are, when it's like I was a kid when I came out. I was 15, and like, for a start, nobody convinced me I was trans. I just actually was trans. And for a second, like when I met people who were medically transitioning, it wasn't like they could like do that easily. Like, it's not like you can have like a 5-year-old kid who like permanently changes their body because of how they feel about gender. Like, that's all like sensationalist rubbish. And I feel like tabloids go around like fear mongering so much about like trans people, because people don't know that much about it, so it's easy to get those news scoops that like sound like very interesting but have almost nothing to them, if that makes any sense. Like, the proportion of people who detransition is like absolutely tiny, and often they do it not because they're not trans, quite a few people, but because they don't feel safe being like physically or socially like having transitioned, and they have to sort of go back into the closet. So it is really frustrating. And I think like seeing like so much like, well, fake news, I guess, about trans people, like barely any of it's true, if that makes any sense. Like we're quite harmless as a bunch, actually.
The least technical.
That's all really good. Thank you so much. We are kind of coming towards the end, so I'm going to cut this question short. I'm going to ask one last positive question, and I'm kind of looking for quick answers about this so we can wrap this up about 1/2 past. And I'm going to ask, what is your favorite thing about being trans and or non-binary?
Well, for me, I feel like it's kind of made me appreciate life a bit more, if you will, because like when I was like 13, which I personally think is a terrible age for anyone, but like I was going through so much like confusion and just like desperately trying to fit in whilst also thinking like I'm so different, and like it was just horrible. And then like when you finally sort of reach the point where you're like, oh, I'm trans, and you settle into that, and it's like it's just nice. It's just nice to finally feel like I may not be what people wanted the outcome, but it's nice to know that like now I've got a bit more appreciation for myself. I can have a bit more appreciation for other things.
Yeah, I just think that trans people are just really cool. Like trans and non-binary people are really cool. So that's just like great. And I love the sense of community and like how we can talk about gender and discuss it and like understand each other. We're just like pretty cool bunch is what I think. And I'm just like, I'm pretty happy with being me. Like
there's definitely more like emotional awareness because you spend so many years and so much time like psychoanalyzing yourself that you almost begin to recognize the same thing in other people. Like I feel like it almost makes you more empathetic.
I think it's more the fitting in. I mean, for years I had this thing of, for years I didn't transition or didn't start to really transition, present and everything else because I was afraid of seeming like neither one or the other. Whereas, because being on the binary scale, not the, yeah. And then as I say, I just ended up fitting in better with friends and friends that understand me. And when I go out more, I don't know how much of that because people are aware of the trans status, but I feel better the way I'm being treated by girls. There's a lot less confusion as well. Admittedly, before the confusion was people were trying to get confused. Well, was I just gay or was I no, because of the people I'm romantically involved in, which is different to trans. But
For me, I think it would just be I think my favorite thing is probably just how freeing it feels to be trans or non-binary. Because it really just does feel like I'm just completely escaped from the shackles of gender. But obviously that's just my perception of it or like personal experience of it. But yeah, I just think it's very freeing to be non-binary. It just
Yeah, and for me, I feel like just the feeling of gender euphoria when, you know, whether it's like someone's used the right pronouns or someone's like gendered you correctly in the street, or whether you put on an outfit that you just think, perfect, this is it, this is what my gender is. Gender euphoria is absolutely one of the best feelings in the world. Everyone's given some really, really amazing, insightful answers throughout this event. So thank you everyone for contributing, and we will bring Ben back now to do his SU stuff.
Thank you, Edwin. I just want to say thank you to every single one of you. It was an amazing discussion, and I'm so thankful that you came onto this platform to talk about like your personal things and talk about your opinions. So thank you so much. Also, thank you specifically, Edwin, for being an amazing moderation discussion lead, and thank you to everyone who is listening and has listened. Hopefully, this will go up on some of the pages, so you can, if you haven't been able to catch it, you'll be able to catch it in the future. But yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you, and I hope that you guys specifically enjoy the week and make use of the resources. And yeah, the next event is on the Friday, and that's a Day of Remembrance event. So I know it's a very heavy subject, so there's absolutely no like compulsion to go, but if you want to stop along at 6 p.m. and if you email, there's an email on the event link that you can email to sign up for it. So I believe that's it. So
Also LGBT, the LGBT Society is also putting up 2 events for Trans Awareness Week. So that's the pub quiz, which is open to all and it's going to be great fun, which is this Wednesday. And there's a raffle involved and the prizes are really good. So make sure to come to that. And we are hosting a Netflix watch party for the documentary Disclosure, which is on Netflix. If any of you have heard of that, that's going to be on Thursday. All the information should be on our Facebook and Instagram, but also on the SU pages, I'm pretty sure. So make sure to come to them and to Ben's Friday thing. And yeah.
Also, just Ben, thank you so much for putting this all together. Trans Awareness Week is one of my personal favourite weeks in the entire year, so this is always really good. So thank you for organising this.
No problem. And oh yeah, also as like last thing, look at, I've just done a blog post about the Trans Fund. So if that's something that you're interested in, please give it a listen and apply. Please give it a read and apply for it. Hopefully it will help a lot of people. But I think that's it. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's listened and all of our amazing panelists. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. I think we'll end it there.